Hello. Welcome
Okay.
to Esoteric Book Club, Tower of Destruction chapter. You'll be, video, yes.
Okay. I had to go to Wi-Fi. Sorry.
You'll be happy to know I've read this whole chapter. Oh,
I did too. It was amazing.
good job. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Thoth deck for the win on that.
Yeah.
I love that card. Yeah, so let's go through overall like general impressions of the chapter first before we go through the line by line. I really love the chapter. I mean, I'm really glad I got to read it. There's definitely some things I didn't agree with him in the end, pretty strongly actually too. Like it was very clear how I didn't agree. But I mean, I think overall, like for again, like right-hand path type of like enlightenment path, like I think this is like very spot on and like yeah, really interesting to expand further on his idea of, you know, evil and the origins of it. I feel like I have a pretty clear idea of Christian Hermeticist kind of perspective on that, which is really appreciated because it's less, I hate that I even had this, you know, preconceived notion about it, but it's less like ignorant or like less not ignorant, like it's not like the devil, you know, like I really thought that was going to be like it was going to be like amorphized or whatever, or like made into this thing that it's not. And I was really grateful that, you know, that line still has like a kind of I don't want to say realistic, but like accessible form of evil that doesn't just scapegoat things, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny because I was reading that Apocalyptic Witchcraft book, and it kind of lays out. You got it.
Yeah.
It kind of lays out the way Christianity like creates evil out of like alienating people, alienating certain viewpoints, like this total separation. Then there's like these separations of nature and, you know, body and mind, like spirit, all these ways that to like pull us apart, you know, and it lays it out really clearly. And I think that's and I don't see that so much in his stuff. There's a little bit, I've been like seeking it out almost lately, like seeking where it is, but it's like he doesn't do that so much, you know, and I like that about it.
Yeah.
Definitely places just out of ignorance, but that's what I'm like seeing so much, like how certain viewpoints like create ignorance around other things. Like you only know so much, and in a certain context you'll like miss so much more of the context. Like that Kali article, you know, he offhand mentions Kali and kind of demonizes her, you know, and like into something evil when it's like that's not, like there's nuance to how Kali operates, you know, and here's this one article that shows that. And it's like Kali and like I feel like you can say like things like the Garden of Eden is like the goddess, and you could worship the goddess as the Garden of Eden. These are thoughts that I had reading this chapter too, you know, like so it's like yeah, just various different ways of viewing the fall in a similar, you could almost like use the same biblical passages but not quite talk about it the way he does, but he does because that's his context. But it kind of blinds the other, you know, the other side of things, like yeah, these gods and goddesses of what we worship that we can do can like give us a perspective of how the Garden of Eden is our kind of playground, and our like it's a playground, but it's also like a place that we cultivate. It's like in a cyclical, harmonious way, and it doesn't have to be just like this weird top, like this vertical, like top down enlightenment thing. Doesn't need to be, but and like a lot of these images, I'm getting like the growth image that he talks about, like growth over like constructing the tower. I love that. And I love the idea of even like the tree roots like breaking the tower from below. You know what I mean? Like that's the power. Like the fucking light thunderbolt from above, sure, like that's like the bigger picture, like the bigger emptiness, you know, but like also like growing, like fertilizing the tree roots with like, and that's almost like with the left-handed path, you know, like the tantric path and such. Like, and I see that both have their place, you know.
Yeah. I agreed. I loved that as well. And excited to talk further, like more about that. Yeah, Brittanya, what was your overall perspective?
Yeah, I think I agreed with both of you a lot. I actually love this chapter. I think its depth and acknowledgement and like preciseness about things was great. I think, like you said, he has like a little bit of his like Christian slant to it. I think one of the things like where Cody, you were talking about like digging and trying to find his like more biases. I think one of them appeared when he was basically saying like there's like the primordial sin where you've like sinned on like a spirit plane, and then that's why you're born in like a bad nation. And he said he went nationalistic for a second. And I was like, and I was like, all right. It seems there was like something there where I was like, okay, like I don't know, there's a little classism or something. I don't know. There was something there that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I was like, I get what he was saying. So I like, brushed over it like I do. But I was like, oh man, I think we've a little since then. And then I think there was something else that was like, I was contrarian to. But I don't know. Overall, I love this chapter. I love like the visual metaphors, the parables attached to them. And I don't know, I really like the differentiation between growth and building too. I think that was like really poignant. I think that like I don't know, sometimes like I wish that I'd read this book in like a different order, because it'd be like certain cards like I think would be important to read like before reading other ones. Like some of the simpler cards may actually work better in a context. Like even like the devil card, like I was like, I wish I just kind of read both of these chapters in one big reading or something. And you know what I mean? Like instead of splitting them up, but I don't know. I loved it. I think it was great.
You're right, because I do want to go, it's like, I really want to go back. I think once I finish the book, I'm going to give it to somebody. But I think before I do that, I need to read Temperance and the Devil again. Like, I really think those two cards, I don't know. I need to like go over them because I feel like the whole thing led up to that. And then I even feel the Tower would have been better like before. You're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, context would have been really like good with this card. Like, I don't know, this is probably one of my favorite chapters I was noticing, like, cause I dog ear every page that I have like a quote on that I like. And like, I think I probably dog eared this chapter the most.
Nice.
Interestingly enough, I was thinking of, I don't know, the name's misleading too, like the Tower of Destruction. It's not really, it's like destruction of like your self-identified self, but not like the true self.
Mm-hmm.
And anything it like gives you the opportunity to become that and kind of ascend. So I don't know. I think it's interesting that destruction's even framed in a positive light too, which I think I appreciated. So it's, I don't know. And the cycle of life is like, growing, like the way he describes the process of growing, I think was so accurate and so like universal. That biological like growth that he's talking about. It's just like, I don't know, I love that.
Agreed. All right, line by line. Read this all in the plane. That's great. All right, so he starts off.
How does he start off?
Kind of by like denouncing the whole like blame it on the devil trope. like on like 432, when he goes into that huge excerpt, and he's talking about how like you don't get hungry, because of the devil, and he even goes so far to say you don't have sexual desires because of the devil.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, like I didn't expect that. Look at that progressive thought pattern. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's is a product of his time too, like the certain progressiveness, like taking hold of Europe, his
But
time and place.
1973, and he lived like from 1900 to 1973.
Yeah.
So it didn't get published till the 80s. So it's like, I think that, yeah, like there was a little bit of more like openness with ideas then, but I think it was even like the very like middle beginning of that era. So I think that was kind of progressive of him as like a Christian to be able to like say that like with like very vividly.
And I was kind of an old man too. He was old-ish when he wrote this, right?
Because he wrote it in the 60s.
Yeah, he wrote it in the 60s, I think. And he was like, yeah, he was 60 some years old. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was therefore souls who committed the original sin, and the body had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and
I have a hard time. Go ahead.
probably talk about how, like the seed of evil is notably in the soul, not his body, like you were saying.
Yeah, what's your impression on that, Cody?
I have a hard time believing in souls like this, like individual souls. I mean, I think you could extrapolate what he says maybe as like kind of a world soul problem, like the idea of like karmically we're like interconnected souls of various forms, and there's like local ones that carry on certain waves and other ones that intersect, in a web, or like a kind of a wavy web kind of that thing. But so yeah, like individual souls, I have a hard time. But I just can't see like it being this kind of like fall of the soul kind of thing. That metaphysics just doesn't grab me. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, I guess.
Souls that we could have become angels, but we like fell instead, and so now like this is our purgatory to like get back up there or something. I was like, sometimes I disagree with hierarchical thinking, because I think it's like a very flawed weakness in humans' minds. Like our minds are literally made to create patterns, to create understanding. And I'm really like, I don't need to do that to understand something. I think sometimes it's not a pattern, but it's about like that like truth and that feeling and that like light, where like that's where you do give up your understanding for understanding, like your false understanding of like, oh, I can cling to this book that says this and it's written in words that I can cite in a text, versus like this experience that I know to be true. Like there's a very big difference. Like you could stir someone by citing a new text, the next week or the next time you see them, but like you can't really stir someone from something that they know is true via like the experience with like that depth of like divinity. So yeah, I don't really like the hierarchical thing at all. I really feel like even in like the concept of like, for lack of a better word, God, like there is no levels. It's like it's all expanding outward all at once, and there's no up or down, left or right, higher or lower. It's all subjective in that way, and it's like your relationship with that life and that experience that you really judge yourself. Like he said, like you really do judge yourself, and that's where he brought me back to it, where I was like, okay, yeah, like all that evil and that judgment that does come from inward. Like this is inward, get tapped in from external things. The external things don't permeate what isn't already within you.
Yeah. I mean,
so I appreciate
like
that accountability was really cool.
I always see it as like fractals. So I agree with you, because I don't like hierarchies either. But I do think that like when you zoom out, the big picture is this is one thing, but then you zoom in and it's still the same thing. It's just like a fraction of it, you know, and it represents the same thing. So that's why, I mean, the next story in Corey Cosmu, right, of you know, Hermes like saying for, you know, whatever, writing this, I mean, that was really like, oh no, was that in this part? Okay, no, that's coming up. I really loved the like, yeah, and Corey Cosmu when the Isis says to Horus, I think page 437, that like made so, I mean, I was like, I've never heard that before, and I'd never like, and I really need to read this because that's like the Hermetic text, you know. I think that'd be like just such an important read. But now, I mean, that made a lot more sense to me than, and I don't like how he tried to relate the Christian fall to it. Like it didn't, to me, I was like, like, I don't know if these two stories are like actually like so similar than what he thought. But that story to me did like represent this like kind of like fractaling of like the souls of the daemons like decided to, I mean, and again, I don't know about the creation aspect either necessarily in that regards, but like have like mess with the same material, and then that's what the fall is represented by in like Hermeticism, you know, I guess, right? Am I explaining that right?
Well, because instead of they were seeking, the whole point was that they were trying to figure out what was in the like residue that he used. So it was like they were trying to be God instead of trying to like work with what they were given in that sense. I kind of like really liked the visceral nature of that too, where you could, but I was also wondering like, okay, if they're daemons or angels and those dichotomies aren't necessarily supposed to be present on that like quote unquote realm. So I was like, I think there's more complexity to like spirits, and you know, especially with this guy, he knows a lot more than I do, but I don't think he knows enough to like say about it.
No,
it's more of a like passed down type thing that I think could almost be another layer of analogy.
Is that what you mean when because when he talked about Adam and Eve being just like all of the daemons, right? Is that what you're thinking? I didn't agree with that.
Yeah, like so the primordial sin is made when you're a soul and you decide if you're going to grow or if you're going to build. And if you build, then he's like, well, go down there and build then. And like, good luck getting back up here versus like, you know, growing.
Yeah, and I don't see it like that either.
Yeah. Well, again, it's like you need both sides. You need the fertile soil of the world and the like light of God, like goodness, you know, like a sun kind of thing. And you need like the reciprocity there. So it's like contained, it's like a big contained system, you know. It's not,
purification system.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like, so like, and it's almost like maybe the falling is like in the fall is kind of an act of like enriching the soil in a sense too, you know, like to build and to grow and to like crumble, you know. There's like, I don't know, I like metaphors like that are interesting. It's interesting. I just read an article about the cliff off by Frater Ocker, and it just I just thought of this connection there. It's like what he taught, and I don't know enough about it to like really go into it, but like this idea that you know, the tree, the Sephiroth, and then like the light, the divine light, like cascades or lightning bolts down, but like it hits Gabarah, and Gabarah can't contain it. The light can't contain Gabarah specifically, and it breaks, and it's like breaks into clay shards, and then that kind of like that's that I think is the like the idea of the fall in Jewish mysticism. right?
Yeah.
But like clinging to the clay shards is like part of the divine, part of the divinity, but it's like disconnected from the source, kind of. And it's trying to like reconnect, and in so doing, it consumes the clay that it's on. So it's like this idea of like trying to get out, and that's like how the cliff off is generated and stuff. I'm sure it gets really complicated.
Jeez.
Really, but it's like that seems like an interesting echoing of that, like the residue, like the soul's like trying to build from the residue that was left over. But
I mean, speaking of, because he goes into, and I don't know if that's the next part, but he goes into like being a, if you are purgatory, right? The purgatory bit where if you're, if you can't, St. John talked about seeing the light and being so overwhelmed by the light because all of your imperfections were shown so clearly to you that you were overwhelmed in you thought you were so unworthy in the presence of God. And so, I mean, I see that as a clear like path like thing, it's like you can have your path be where you strive to be light and, purify so that when you meet the divine light, you're, fully, and, there's really nothing bad to show, I guess, right? That would be like the thing. But then the dark, and I understand the dark as well, but it's more like in the exact opposite way. Like you're so comfortable with your dark that the light doesn't, like, it just absorbs it all, right? Like it just kind of goes into that and is like, I mean, not according to his model, but like being in that dark space, understanding that in this model. I don't know. But it just made a very clear thing for like middle pathway for me, which I mean, I know he wouldn't particularly agree with that, but it's like being accepting of your dark, but understanding how to navigate that through your light, right? And like being in a flow with it, I think is just like, when I read that bit, I was like reaffirmed in my like middle pathways, I'll say. But
I'm not sure about using necessary light and dark as like adequate metaphors. I think it's similar to what we were talking about last week that George brought up, like shining the light is like, what does that really mean? And what is the actual darkness? It's like, I don't know, inadequate metaphors.
Well, I think it's more of like a metaphysical analogy, whereas like darkness is more of like a psychological analogy. Or like I don't know. It's kind of like just having something so bright on you that you just like shrink under it and like you feel dark. There's like this illusion of like mental darkness that like comes up because like this light that's more than you can contain is showing you parts of yourself that you don't like, or that you need to work on, or need to be purified in some way or acknowledged or whatever.
I mean, I like living my life as like facing that, I mean, just practically, right? Like exposing the things that make you uncomfortable so that you could see what you want to do with it. Because I guess that is like shining divine light on your life. But I mean, again, you could do that in little ways to where if this is, if this is like how it is, then like when you get there, it's not going to be so jarring.
Yeah.
Or feel like you'll be prepared before you go. It's like dressing for the occasion. You know what I mean? Like
I mean, I read a lot of like how ego is developed and stuff into this chapter, so like, yeah, I mean, we develop. It's like he says, like we all have our little towers that we're building. It's like that's our tower of personality, from like our worldly self, and it's like, of course it's going to have its blind spots. It's like exactly what I was saying, like we build these towers and blind ourselves to outside worlds, you know, in various ways. We separate ourselves through ego development, right? That's like a stage of like development that we separate our like as a self. We become self-identified, you know, separate from the world, whereas like as infants we're just, you know, we're all part of it. So yeah, I mean, we're developing an ego, and that like blinds us, and that causes us a lot of suffering, you know. And then like we might get these glimpses of just the divine truth, like the absolute, like in the Buddhist, like emptiness and such that like it's like humbling, because it's like you see how small yourself is, and that is kind of like, and that can be the dark night of the soul when you really get it. And that's like there's so many sources that talk about this, where like suddenly you're like, holy shit, my ego is just so fragile and so like ephemeral, you know, all my attachments. And like, and that's actually like a well noted like thing that happens with like experienced meditators too, that can happen, that can like throw people into total like ego backlash, you know. It's like, and it's like, and it's actually something that happens to all of us, I think. It's like the existential moment, like, oh shit, like I am so fucking small, you know, and like, and all this shit that I'm still caught up in, you know. It's like, but why, you know? It's like, in the face of like the big, like, and that is kind of the, I don't know, it is purgatory in a sense. But it, like, you can kind of like, when you start being comfortable with that emptiness, you know, with like the ultimate like egolessness, you know, the ultimate like, because when you're like, you easily backlash and you like grab onto whatever you can to hold your ego together when you're like faced with the void, you know, like that's and that's like how we keep building our ego too, you know. So it's like we're terrified of like God, which I think I see like emptiness, that like that the space between that makes anything happen possible, you know.
It's beautiful. Would he agree with that? I mean, on 436, that's when he really starts talking about this, right? Like the ahamkara versus the avita. I think he, you know, it's some Tibetan kind of terms for these things, right? Or maybe
he's using the Indian terms.
Oh, the Vedic. Or I guess
well, from he cites the guy who came. It's
Swami Vahat. Oh, Mahad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Madhavananda Nandan.
But it's like Vedic tradition. But yeah,
Vedic,
like
right?
yeah, and in like this idea of ignorance, he's not saying that it's wrong. He's just kind of like adding. He's trying to add a Christian moral dimension to it. So he's like, it's, but
because I don't know if I don't think he goes into I don't think, maybe it's because of his tradition doesn't really focus on ego work like that, probably. But I don't recall, like, I don't know, like in his growth model, what does that look like for the ego? Because he also said a lot about the separating not being a part of Hermeticism. And I think that's where I disagreed the most in this chapter of, I don't even know if that's next. I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit. He said, like, if you start to separate things, you stop seeing the like whole interconnectedness of it, and you start building more towers, kind of, or something like that. I mean, maybe
I think he was talking about how like you can't split your soul in half and be like, oh, that part of me sinned and this part of me didn't. You can't like absolve yourself without going through the pain of like the purification. Because like if you're separating yourself, then you're building an ego to like pad whatever that darkness is.
Oh.
Like you're like feeding the egregores that you've made that are becoming towers.
Yeah, he's saying you can't separate your like separating your what he calls empirical self from your higher self, that
But you know what I thought was interesting? Well, he does this in a lot of the chapters where he'll be like, this is the Eastern way and this is the Western way. And, then this is like the perfect way. And, it's like door number 1, door number 2, door number 3. But I think that he does miss a lot of context in like the Indian, like Vedic tradition, because he kind of says it more of a like physical separation, like, or like the Christians are like, oh, you have to separate from your body is the sin, the inheritor of the sin, whereas like they say that it is your soul, but they say that to like so that would be a good example of what you were asking, is like to separate your soul from like your empirical self from your true self would be to meditate and try to like go blank.
Yeah.
And like ignore everything and be like, oh, I'm tuning out and I'm separating myself from that version of myself. And then I'm building a tower, like in a way by doing that.
Yeah.
I meditated for so long and I feel like it's only brought me like space and time, like Cody has said, with like the void that makes everything possible. I feel like it's only brought me into that and closer to that, like not because of the elimination of thoughts, but because of like the purity of the experience in which I meditate. And it's not like, oh, I'm trying to meditate, trying not to think. Like sometimes it's like that. And sometimes meditating is in vain. You're just doing it as a practice, because some days are harder than others. And you have to practice on those hard days to be able to do it another day. To like have that connection or that experience that you want. But I don't necessarily agree with him saying that that's like a separation of like from your true self, because I feel like in a way like they're like micro doses of surrender to like the divinity of like the experience, which isn't coming from you. It's not like an evil coming from inside like a lot of our thoughts and vices are. I think it's different. And so I don't know, he kind of invalidated something that I kind of hold dearly, so I was like
Did he though? Like, did he invalidate it? Because I don't, he talks about meditation later as like the only way that you could get,
But that's me, because it's like his version of meditation, like he doesn't ever define it. He defines what it isn't in every single chapter.
Right.
Things that he isn't are things that I actually like disagree with him on, but I would love to know his definition of like meditation, because I think that's like at the core of this whole book.
Yeah.
What do you guys think his definition of meditation would be?
Fervent, like a fervent prayer to God, I would say. Like, I mean, and it wouldn't have to be a word prayer, but it would be like being in like a love state of God, like in the presence of God.
Being burned by the fire of love.
I would think. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, like
his lightning bolt seems to be like his like highest level of like that in a way.
But I would say that probably like I don't think that like I don't think that the experience would be that different between like what he gets and what you would on like the most peaceful meditative states.
I agree with that, but I want to know what his like idea of meditation is. Give me better context in like the reading, because sometimes I feel like he might be like backhanding something, but maybe he's not, and I just feel like he is.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I just still read it with my own, my own definition of meditation. So.
I mean, I would feel like he'd be more dogmatic about how he practices himself. I think he might maybe, and this may be why he hasn't defined it, is because he's trying to be more open about that, but it's coming across a little condescendingly, maybe. I don't know. That's kind of a strong word for it, but like, I think he'd be more dogmatic about how he would pray. Like he would have like a set kind of like way to do that, that works for him, that maybe he doesn't think works for everybody. Maybe this is just my image of him too.
I mean, but bringing it back to the separation of selves, like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's ever saying that, like what your type of meditation would be. It would be like separating yourself.
Well, I mean, practice to like reach nirvana per se. I kind of do it because I feel like you're in every time you're meditating, like you're already there, you know, and you trying to get somewhere, building a tower to somewhere that you already are in, you know, type thing. But
yeah, I agree with that.
He talks in generalities about like the more established types of meditations that are like, I am trying to reach nirvana. This is like a thing I'm trying to do. And so I think it depends. If I read it, I don't get offended, but I feel like when he talks about like the generalities, I think he is talking about it in that way. So it's like, I don't personally get offended. I'm like, oh, he seems to be like backhanding like that like way. And I like get what he's saying. Like, I don't know. Maybe I agree with him more now. I don't know.
I just think he betrays his own ignorance to people who can see it who understand these traditions that he's talking about a little bit better than he does, maybe. Because he clearly does. And he says like I think what caught me was like, he says there's a moral quality. He's like, the Christian version has this moral quality. I find this interesting, and maybe talk about it more too, but that's kind of a way of saying that, like, he's like saying that the Buddhist or Hindu way doesn't have a moral quality, but that's total bullshit. That's like,
yeah,
he just doesn't understand.
When does he say that?
He said it like it was after page 436 or something. And then he goes,
before the Hermes bit.
Well, and then there's like the synthetic work versus like because then he kind of like, because he kind of starts the chapter talking about like the artificial demons, and then like I feel like that is like corresponding to like synthetic work of like building the tower versus growing.
Oh. Yeah, okay. Analytical knowledge to creative synthetic work. Yeah. So, I mean, but this is talking about the Hermes. They changed their fundamental attitude from the vertical attitude, God soul, to the horizontal attitude, soul world. I mean, yeah. The bringing in of the vertical, and that's on page 438, sorry. Wow.
But I did like the meaning of like the garden and like the gardener and like being engendered with like this natural, I guess, like mission to like cultivate and maintain like within ourselves, but also within like the external world around us.
Yeah.
Sweet. I thought it was interesting what he pointed out about Adam and Eve getting to like name the animals and how that controls their mission. I didn't know if I like well, I was like, where did that come from? Like you just kind of like slip that in there, and I was like, what? Like, no, because then that would just make them more like demigods, or like that would be giving them the option to be like from the Hermes, like to be those souls that are trying to like create Asgard instead of doing the mission.
Well, but that's what I think didn't he see, I'm still confused about how he called all of the like daemons Adam and Eve. Like, he was saying basically that Adam and Eve were more than this is what I thought he was saying, that there were more than just Adam and Eve there, that it was like all of these like Adam and Eves that were like doing, maybe, I just didn't understand how he related those two. Like, I thought those two stories were pretty, like, kind of different. Like, yeah, there was like some similarity in some like overarching way, but like, even when you think about the Daemons like assigning, like doing animals based on the zodiac, that was like such a cool thing for me to read, because if I'm like associating, that's like why people can be like tied to some animals versus another, you know what I mean? Or like, oh, this type of, like, I've just heard so much of that in like the Chinese zodiac and the like regular zodiac of like, this star sign doesn't like dogs or whatever, you know? And it's like, I mean, those things are kind of silly, but at the end of the day, like, I liked that a lot, like bringing back, like, not like this, like, I'm assigning this animal a function, you know, but it's more like this is a part of, like, it's like a part of the whole that I'm bringing into like material existence, you know? Like, it felt very like fluid in my reading of it. But I mean, maybe I just went to, I sometimes get too like fantasy when I read stuff like that I like really resonate with, you know, and I like take it really like kind of literally and then create all these pictures. But the picture of the like hermetic thought, you know, creation story, like just like really resonated with me a lot more than I've ever felt with the Adam and Eve story. And I feel like him trying to compare them to just like really like isolate, you know.
Yeah. I think it's less about, like, I think that the second story, not Adam and Eve, but the hermetic story, is more about the conditions of life before you know, creation, before the fall. Whereas I feel like both stories kind of are about the fall, but like one of them is like pinpointing like and trying to like be, I think, a little literal when it's been taken too literal throughout history, like the Adam and Eve story. I think it's more metaphorical, but I liked how the Hermes story kind of permeated that bubble and kind of went beyond and gave us like a little like prequel to the circumstance of the fall. And
So
both stories are supposed to be metaphors in two different ways. And like, it's basically just saying like we had like a primordial choice in which like our souls kind of chose like what weaknesses and stuff where the light was going to get shined on. And like this realm is that of that light being shined upon us and like us being seemingly in darkness.
I mean, okay, that makes more sense. And I hope that that's what like, but I mean, in how I read it, I think he pictured them as like the same event, because he was like, the one is a commentary on the world whilst the other is a chronicle of it. So like, I felt like he was just saying that both of these stories happened at the same, like, I mean, not same time, but you know, were like the same like instance of, and one was more saying like commentary while the other was like saying what actually happened.
Adam Eve is the one that's saying it would actually happen.
Yeah, so he's saying that Adam and Eve's the chronicle while the Corey Cosmu one's the commentary.
Right, it's Adam Eve is like the story of the action of what actually happened.
Well, yeah.
Right. And the other one is kind of the context or something.
But again, I don't see.
I didn't quite understand that part, so I think I kind of just glossed it over a little bit.
Like, I just don't see how the Adam and Eve story would be like an accurate representation of what the Corey Cosmu story is. Like, it just seems
Eden before, and Eden was supposed to be heaven, and so their souls were like technically like whole and unlit, you know, like they didn't have any impurities yet, but once they ate from the tree, that's when they became impure, and that's when the light shined on them, and that's when the real world started. That's when they got kicked out of like heaven, aka like the garden, aka Eden, and they're booted into like that world of like struggling and suffering.
so. I mean, he's equating eating the apple with the point when the Daemons are like, "What is this material?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so to me, those aren't like equitable like comparisons. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the substance that they're playing with is like, oh, well, how does this stuff work, and how can we build stuff with it? And the apple is a metaphor for like knowledge that we can build on as well, you know.
Oh,
They're both kind of Prometheus tales too, right? It's like, yeah,
okay.
I thought reading him too.
sharing the knowledge, you know, like, and then making ourselves as gods with it. That's the whole idea. That's the analog. It's like us. It's like souls like grabbing onto this like substance and trying to make something with it, rather than just letting it whatever it is, letting it permeate us like it always did, just like lift us up in God's light or whatever in the garden. You know, it's like this separation where we can go, oh, like how look what we can do, how we can manipulate.
Okay, thank you. That makes more sense.
Remember when you were in like school and you had like a really good idea for like a science fair project, and then like you showed like the preliminary ideas to somebody and
Shat all over it,
or they just like took your idea and tried to like make it their own. Like that's what I think like the equivalent is, kind of, where God's like, yo, what the fuck? Like you're taking my like excess goo and trying to like synthesize your own. Like it's like, what is it? Mimicry is like the best form of flattery, kind of, but it's like really not it. It's like disingenuine in a sense because it's not original.
See, that's so to me, okay. And then this is where like, so to me, that's like a beautiful, like that's like a fractal relationship, you know? Like there's nothing like, I mean, then it's like, why would God like separate him? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I just think that's like a natural progression of like how, I mean, we're seeing this, and I'm excited to bring this up, but like we're seeing the same thing today with like the AI stuff, right? Like we're now like creating things that are like separate from ourselves, that like that's like kind of like, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's me being like way too literal about it, but it's like,
right, because it's like they're like, who's taking credit for the artwork now, the artist or the programmer? Because if it's the artist, then it's the AI, but if it's like the programmer who put in the click words, you know, and just so, then, you know, so it's like, yeah, it's just like that.
yeah. And like, I don't know, I mean, there is so much controversy around that subject, but I mean, again, that just does feel like a natural progression of things. And like, yeah. And then, I mean, yeah, like, I mean, our thing has been to like, try to like, like destroy God. Like if we're going to make AIs, then, I mean, maybe they are going to destroy us, because like, you know, so much of the material world has been trying to destroy God, you know? So there is like legitimate fear there that's like, you know, but at the same time, like the whole underlying like staying in light is understanding the symbiotic relationship of it and having like a bigger picture of the fractal of like, this form of creation is not something that should be like shamed or evil, or like that, understand your darkness so that it can be a point of growth, you know?
Yeah, and that's like that apocalyptic witchcraft book is really great for that kind of thinking, I think, like, because that's what it's all about. It's like major left-hand path stuff, you know, like it's like, yeah, you know, sex magic, blood magic, like cannibalism, like all kinds of shit.
Oh my God.
But in like, but not in like literally, you know, like the understanding and embracing kind of like that like the goddess is a cannibal, you know, like, and that like, and embracing like the whole, and that's like embracing this world as like that like fertile ground of growth where things can grow, you know. And I think it gets to this kind of the same place. That's so.
Well, and I think too, you're right. Like, I love how you described the tree in the beginning with the roots spreading down and, you know, into the soil while the branches, you know, absorbing the light. Like, but at the center of that is like, yeah, I mean, heart level thinking where you have empathy and you have like judgment, you know what I mean? Or you have like understand, like those things like really come to clear when in the center point. I mean, yeah, something I've always said is like, you know, humans are at the like right perspective, you know, it's like we can be at that like heart level because we understand the below, and we understand we have the perspective of the below, and we have the perspective of the above, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
we're getting there.
And it's like, yeah, and like the point, yeah, we're all, and the Christianity has spent so much, and Christianity and like the inheritors of the basic way of separating, which is like the scientific establishment now, you know, the scientific capitalist establishment, probably,
Yeah.
because that's the evil, but it's kind of the same idea of like it's demonizing certain, always will demonize something in order to lift itself up. It's like, and there is this kind of building a tower there too, which is really interesting. There's this separation that's happening from like, we're the great, like the pure, and this is like impure, you know, this is these people are wrong. And so all these like fueling of like of that, of like demonizing something, just is like kind of what creates this dynamic that actually is the suffering in some sense too,
Yeah.
which is really interesting. But that's all part of the, you know, the whole thing too, you know. It's like when you embrace all sides, like, and stop demonizing, stop separating, then you're like basking in the whole, and it's glorious.
Yeah, I'm trying to find, because that's okay. Yeah. This means to say the alchemical principle being the soul of Hermeticism, it is the marriage of opposites and not their divorce, which constitutes the basis of practical Hermeticism. And then he says the magic of the cross alchemy operating in the marriage of opposites is therefore the sole hope for the world, for mankind, and for history. This is why it rejects the principle of divorce and war, the surgical principle in practice as well as in theory, spiritually, morally, and intellectually. The soul of Hermeticism is that nothing should be lost, all should have eternal life. Is he agreeing with you, or is he disagreeing with you? Because I had so many question marks there.
I'd like to think he's agreeing with me there on some level, but I think I think he has a lot of stuff like that feels that way, but yet like he's still kind of separating, you know, he's still doing the act of separating in his writing in a lot of places. Like we've pointed it out a lot in this book. So it's, and yet like he separates in order to unify sometimes too, you know, like he actually does go through that process, which is really
my point. And I think that like, I don't think that I guess my counter or whatever, the like point of contention that I had is that I don't think all Hermeticists would agree with this. So to say that that's like the overall Hermetic way is like, I think really false, because like a big part of alchemy is to like separate the parts so that you can understand the whole. Like that's like literally what the like daemons were doing in that text, you know. And like, while I think in this tradition that's considered evil, you know, but like I don't think that that's like, I mean that's a part of my practice, but it is to unify and to understand the whole. You separate out so that you can clearly see from all perspectives, and then you reintegrate that part in yourself, you know. And doing this over iterations allows you to understand how all these parts contribute to the whole. Like, and I think that's a really beautiful act. Like, I think that's like creation and creating like yourself and others. And I mean, I don't see any other point to like doing this work, you know, because then again, you're falling into that, like, I think tower mindset of just like kind of ignoring those parts of you and separating it out of like what, you know. So maybe my definition of separation is not the same as what he's thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think I get it. I think it's like often it's taking one side above the other in that separation. So it is kind of like building that tower above.
So like the hierarchical?
Yeah, like creating this hierarchical, it's like building yourself out of, as like to have it. And again, it's like that whole idea of like having temporary advantage, he says. You build a system in order to have temporary advantage. And that's kind of where the separation goes wrong. And that's where like demonization can happen, where like this is the pure and the other is wrong, So that's the kind of separation that creates trouble, So it's like, yeah, it's like taking either or, specializing. You take one thing and you like let out the other, like you discount the other sides of things. Again, it's like blinding like we put blinders on ourselves when we like focus on one thing, but
I mean, that's so okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess just as long as you go back and in his mindset, like, I mean, yeah, probably what I'm doing then is be like, because I like to like separate myself. I mean, that's the elemental work. That's planetary work. I guess he did get into that, right? Didn't he talk about, what was his perspective on planetary work? Because I kind of.
He was just talking about like the days, like we don't need, he's basically saying you don't really need to separate out by the planets. And like all you need is the, like the Holy Spirit or whatever, like Christian stuff, Christian things for the days instead of the planetary days. And I almost like wanted to take that further. By the way, I'll digress a little bit, but I almost wanted to take that further. We don't need that. We just need to like feel ourselves in nature and like everything as it is, just as it is, not like separate anything out really, because that's like what we're creating. But that's my take. Obviously, like I think it's awesome to like and I think the Hermeticist does explore all these things to like figure out, because it's like he says that in other places. So I don't know. He's not like completely discounting the planets, but he's just saying you don't need them, and you don't need any of that.
No.
It's just what's that? Well, I mean, I'm saying the general like people, like we don't need any, like there's different personalities resonate with different things, and it flows differently. That's all. It's just ways of, and we all have to like, we all are in these bodies and in these egos, so we are like sorting things only with the information that we have, so like no matter what, there's going to be ignorance. Like we don't have the whole picture,
It just feels a little,
maybe when you're enlightened or something you have it, but who knows.
Sure, it feels a little, I hate using this like term, and I've been using such harsh terms tonight, but it feels a little blasphemous to like discount like parts, to call yourself a Hermeticist but discount so many like integral parts of Hermeticism. Like big part of that is like working with these different like elements and spaces and zones, and like I think that was like a big part of the teaching of like Hermes and like these paths climbing together in that way. Like,
but he's made it very clear that Christianity is like the progression of that Hermetic path, and that's
okay.
Yeah, I mean, he made that. What chapter was it? Like, because it's the whole Christian eschatology, like it's the teleology. It's the way it's like history is moving towards one thing, and so Christ came along at this place where he could influence the Hermeticists in this way, like that kind of thinking.
Okay.
But still with the knowledge, like he obviously acknowledges that not everyone, that people in the world don't hear of Christ, and that other systems are fine. And he even says like anything that is getting to this particular understanding of growth or whatever it is fine. God won't like judge them, you know, because he can't, like, obviously, like, just, but he just, from his perspective, it's like he has this Christian value system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So
Is that a bunny?
Yeah.
What? Oh. Oh yeah.
hi, Bun. Oh, it's so brave tonight. What do you think?
Also kind of like ceremonial magic is like building a tower too, because like the ceremonies are like done in vain.
Probably.
Okay.
I know, but
No.
That's why I
calm down.
this idea of meditation, because it was like for me, like ceremonial magic is meditation and it is like prayer and it's like all those types of things like wrapped into one. So when he said that, I was like, oh, that's why I asked you guys about what you think his version of meditation was, because it was like,
Mhm.
like seems to be like discounting other people's like paths to the same place.
Yeah.
And
It's like
doesn't have
it's
to
like he can't see that the entire edifice of the Catholic Church, like all the ritual, the whole sacrament, all of Mass could be a tower, just by his own definition, you know, by that
Absolutely.
same logic.
And it's kind of like, what's the point then if you're not gonna like, I mean, maybe this is again too like reductionist of me, but it's like if you're not gonna like separate, if you're not gonna like understand what your ego is composed of and what you need to make up for this life, and like, I don't know, I mean, it feels like a little bit like, what's the point of having incarnation in a lot of regards, you know? And maybe that's like, maybe that is the point, is to stop incarnating, I mean, or to not understand how you're, I mean, I just think my it's just because my path like embraces like that a lot more, you know. I mean, and maybe that's the phase of life in that I'm in. Maybe that's, um, but I like to like grab life, you know, like understand it and like create things and like move things. Cause I mean, I feel like it's like, what's the point if not that, you know? Cause that is like a reflection of God, and like being in line with being in flow with nature is to like create.
Yeah, I mean, I still see it as going to the same place. Like, I think he would say that like it's just a different way of getting about it. It's like not grabbing it, but allowing like the grace of God to move you and embrace life and create, like, you know, in the way that you're saying, even, you know, and I think you would even get to the same place with like a flow state kind of creation, and a place where like, and there is a moral aspect to it, in the sense that like you like when you're just, it's like that, it's again, it's like comes back to like the advantage, like the temporary advantage. When you build yourself up to have an advantage, you're like you're probably creating suffering for that which you're having advantage over, you know, and you're creating a certain separation there. So it's like, it's just telling, it's like it, and that's, of course we're going to be doing that all the time, because that's like we're living, you know, and we are in this world. But like, to be aware of that, I don't know, that's my take, is like to be aware of that. And that's part of like understanding too, is understanding that moral dimension, and how, and the ways we might build ourselves up in order to like, in the ways that might be causing suffering to ourselves and others, to the whole, you know, whatever the suffering is. But like, I think there's this sense like, and like, that's why I like this metaphor of like tending the garden, is like, there's a sense like when you're in it, like then there's like this creative outgrowth that you like, you can be you, and but like you're like in it, you're like feeling so fully the everything in a way that like there's no suffering, and you can just create all that you want. I don't know what that looks like, but I think there's like but I don't know if you can do that without suffering, if there's like any creation without some kind of suffering either. Like so like it's a tough one, you know. It's like this is really hard stuff to talk about in that sense too.
Kind of reminds me of like the Wheel of Life or the Wheel of Fortune, where it's like the fall is really like you're coming back around to an ascent. It's like that process of like constantly realizing and then like falling or ascending.
And I get this sense of like I like the idea of like thinking of yourself as the ecosystem too, because then there's like a certain broadening of understanding where like you become the cycle, and then you're not like caught up in the individualized like suffering of it, but you're like you have kind of both. Again, it's like not losing anything. You have yourself, but then you also have, so there is still like suffering, I guess, but it's like you just like understand the pulse of everything. And it's like suffering doesn't actually, the suffering, I don't know, I have to stop there. I just got that way ahead of myself and just contradicted myself in my head, so I got to work on that. What I'm saying.
No, I thought that was cool to hear.
No, I hear you. I feel you.
I don't know. I guess it's just like there's the moral dimension is that we are part and we are interconnected. So like what is like the part I can do as like somewhat of a sense of an individualized thing that's like intricately connected to everything. So like that's the moral, that's like the heart, because the heart is like a congregation of like self, of selfhood in a sense.
I mean, I do think that people are meant to cause certain types of suffering in your life for reasons of like learning. I mean, I think if you have awareness of that, then it becomes like everything can be something where you can use for your spiritual path, you know what I mean? And use as a point of growth for your soul, for your being, for being in flow state better. I think the issue comes in when people can't see their that suffering can be used as a form of that type of growth, that you run into a lot of issues, because that's where I think, current status is, I don't think that people see their suffering as points of growth. I think that people see them more as like things, and then it just snowballs into becoming like way too big of an issue for like a lot of people to be able to handle. Like we see a lot of more disenfranchisement because there's blinders on to more people than maybe there have been I don't know, maybe this is always the case, but like my thing is to like help people, or I like to think that if I'm going to cause suffering in the future, which we will because we exist in the world, that at least it can be from a point of like this, I hope that you can use this as a point of growth. And I acknowledge that you hurt me, but I recognize that that was part of this journey of you in my life. And I don't like it, but I appreciate you showing me it, like that's at least how I'm trying to approach situations now. And I think that's like more of a like healthy like flow of that. I don't know if that helps what you were thinking.
In a sense, that's like acknowledgement of like a deeper acknowledgement of the interconnectivity too, right? Because like you can acknowledge that like any lesson from another node, like say another human is a node in the web, like intersecting, and it is still part of you because you're part of the same web, right? So like you're teaching each other. There's like interchange of like energy and like the wave in the weft, the warp and the weft. So like, and it's like acknowledging that, and then it's like, then your own node doesn't become so like isolated and like thinking it's separate from the rest. And that's thinking it's separate is like what he's talking about is like, and what he cites like the Indian and the Buddhist versions of ignorance, right? It's like it is ignorance because it's like when you think you're separate, they're like totally blocking the fact that like that's not possible, you know, there is no separation. And it's like, and that's a root of a certain kind of, I would almost say a certain kind of suffering, like a different kind of suffering. It's like the suffering of the ultimate void that I was talking about earlier. Thinking that, yeah, but it's like a more existential, it's like a more existential suffering or something.
Okay.
Or like it's talking about suffering is hard. It is, because like, yeah, there are different kinds of suffering, and it's like you become so isolated and bound by that suffering, you know, it's like by that ignorance that you like, and you become small and you become separate, and like, and you can't see the big picture, you know, you can't you like become more, and it's like the hatefulness and like all that stuff comes out of that kind of like, and then the need to dominate and all these kind of weird neuroses that are like kind of that world dimension. So like, I guess all I'm saying is like that like the more we can like understand that we're all interconnected, I think is like it's like a broadening of self that actually like is the kind of embracing of all things that is God.
Yeah, deep. We're like, we figured it out. That's it, we're done. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
But and like I think you're like the like figuring out the elements, like the planets, all that stuff is like, again, part of what broadens your understanding of yourself. Obviously you're doing that. That's what, like, you're understanding the elements of nature that make up this like nature,
like
what
position,
like is contained in that
like understand where your position, your personal position is in the universe, like, because your perspective is like, I mean, what I just saw on like Instagram, you know, it's like reality doesn't exist unless it's observed, you know? So that's, I mean, that's so deep. Like, I want to have my like observation be that, to where my like lens is wide enough to like encompass like the most like perspectives that I can in this lifetime, so that you can like understand how you're connected to them, you know, and like understand how you can cause joy or suffering to this person, you know, potentially, or not, you know, or like spread whatever, you know, type of like learning needs to happen in order to like, I guess, yeah, propel that connectivity. I've never really thought of it until this conversation before like that, but that is like a really valuable like aspect in that branch of it. But yeah, I just think for perspective reasons is more so like why you would like choose alchemical like roles like that, and adaptation and adjustment.
I think there's a certain like learning to dance with that too, you know. It's like, and learning to be like a unique dancer on the dance floor.
Nice.
It's hard to think that just like, I don't know, I think a lot of his thing is like having just having faith in the divine light to give you all that you need, and not having to figure anything out beyond that. And I get that too, like just opening, just like it's like the fully just opening yourself to just purely what is, and then you're just like in it, and then you don't have to figure anything out. You don't have to like create any kind of, you really don't have to make any kind of system out of it. But sometimes systems help us get into that. That's my feeling.
I think there must be a big sense of peace that comes with that type of surrender in the way that he discusses in the text. Which I mean, I think, is very valuable for like a majority of people that have maybe otherized themselves in these type of ways for most of their lives. Like, that would like, I think that's like, can be equally as beautiful as long as you don't reject, the connectivity or like reject others' forms of divinity.
Yeah, what is it? And he, like his whole thing of like mysticism, what is it? A hermetic embraces the mysticism, gnosis, magic.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the fourth one?
There's only 3 because it was related to the poverty, chastity, and obedience.
Right.
So it was just magic, mysticism, and gnosis.
Yeah. I thought it was 4 because it corresponded to the Yod He Vav He, but I'm getting that.
No, I think because Yod He Vav He, there's He twice.
Oh, right. And the second He is just like a recapitulating it. It's like writing.
It's like the 3 into. It's like a mirror image, right?
Right.
Wow, we did read this book.
Yeah.
I always feel like I forget immediately after I read, but this reminds me that I have not forgotten that.
He like brings back stuff from other chapters too, which is nice. He's like, remember on this card? He's like, now we're applying it.
True.
I like he even brings back like the lovers, like the marriage of opposites and stuff like that, which I don't think he really talks about in the lovers, but I think that's like really that much, but I think that's actually a big part of it.
Yeah.
The underlying meaning.
I agree with that. Gemini ways. Cool. I think we covered majority of the topics, right?
Yeah. And I just want to like kind of give like the shout out to the kind of like the really basic, like just the simple way of seeing this card, that like we're like getting into these, but like castles made of sand, right? Like anything that we build that we think we're like from our ego is like that, it will crumble, because of impermanence, like the basic tenet of impermanence is in this card. And I like that. That's just a really simple reading of it.
I did want to talk about what we just touched on with the obedience, chastity, and poverty with magic, gnosis, and mysticism, where he said purification, illumination, and union. Page 456. I mean, it's kind of what we've been talking about a long time, but I think that was the first time he brought that up, right? Maybe not. For this reason, the stages or stages of the soul corresponding to concentration, meditation, and contemplation are those of purification, illumination, and union. And it is 3 sacred vows of obedience, chastity, and poverty, which render concentration, meditation, and contemplation effective with the view to the realization of the soul's purification, illumination, and union. So I think he just expanded on it a little bit more on saying like, I mean, of what we were talking about with meditation and whatnot, but with the concentration, meditation, and contemplation. And then he expanded upon what that meant, right?
Well, that's where he defines his meditation.
Okay, so then this
fairly
is
clearly, right?
So then that would be his definition of, I guess, meditation, huh?
Concentration is like kind of like the preliminary. I think he's talked about this, like the ability to have single point focus. That kind of the early, like usually what so many meditation systems have that you do, like you learn to concentrate on, and then you like get absorbed in that, and that's meditation, where you're just in it. Meditation is just meditation. There's not actually another word for it. It is what it is. And then gnosis, which is like the
contemplation,
fulfillment of that. Yeah.
And that's like applying it. Wait, how did he describe it? Hold on.
Well, it says in order to concentrate, it is necessary to have obtained a certain degree of freedom and detachment. In order to meditate, one must place oneself within the light from above. And in order to experience contemplation, it is necessary to become one with this light.
Right. And that's an interesting, like again, the metaphor of light from above is weird to me, because I can't handle that, like just pure like vertical thing where like I think it's the light from all around, I'd much rather look at it that way. But
talking about reflection, like light reflects off objects, and that we wouldn't be able to see. It was like the room analogy with like the light going through the middle of the room, and if there was nothing in the room for the light to off of, we wouldn't see it, but the light illuminates everything to where we can see it and appreciate it.
Right. And I almost feel like that like, the Buddhists like talking about luminous emptiness is kind of the same idea too. Like the light, the luminosity of the emptiness between things is what allows us to have experience at all. Like it's what's actually shining light on our causal, like embodied experience. Like in a very clean and neat way, where we're like just in it, when you're in that space, when you're in that space of luminous emptiness, which is that meditative or contemplative state, right? In the Buddhist tradition.
Nice.
So it is like, again, it's like all around. Again, it's the light that's just is everywhere, is everything, not a light from above at all. It's just I prefer that metaphor. Maybe like it's blinding me to something, so to speak, blinding.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Yeah. You're right. Light is kind of a limiting. Like, yeah. Because it can be too bright sometimes.
Well, here he comes. Actually, I don't think he like disagrees necessarily with the magic behind planetary, because he goes into like how there's value in like the spiritual like power of the day, and that one invokes and unites with the Holy Spirit on a Thursday instead of quote unquote invoking the genius of Jupiter. That there's like a supernatural power regarded to the astral influence of the day, hours, and years. And this is the thunderbolt which has blasted the tower of astrology, specialized logical magic. So it's like, it's weird because he's doing that thing again where he's like saying something and then agreeing but disagreeing with it. but also like carving it in half while trying to like have a duality like exist in the same places of separation. Oh.
Oh man.
It's like on the second to last. It's like right at the end too. So I was like, it's at 4:58, like near the middle end.
Yeah.
And like, it seemed like he was almost talking like derogatory about like present day magic versus like sacred magic from back in the day too, because it was like talking about how like things become more specialized and that like the like people have built more, you know, like towers in which to like reach that enlightenment. And so he's like kind of equating magic and like astrology to that in a way. But then he also agrees with like the supernatural power of like days. So I'm like, which one is it? Are we allowed to have both? Is both an option?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in his book, like,
Well,
yes, in my book, but
he finishes the chapter with like, you know, don't be a builder, be a gardener, you know.
yeah.
So I mean that that's what he's saying.
But it's like the 16th, so this is 459, like the 16th major arcanum of the tarot is therefore a warning addressed to all authors of systems where an important role is assigned to a mechanical ingredient, intellectual, practical, occult, political, social, or other systems. It invites them to devote themselves to tasks of growth instead of those of construction, to tasks as cultivators and guardians of the garden instead of builders of the Tower of Babel. So he's not shitting all over any author of a system. He's just saying be wary that you're cultivating and guardians of this knowledge and growing it instead of building yourself to be of the same thing of God, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Better.
And it's like there's an inevitability to being struck down. Again, it's the castle made of sand. Like you have your tower struck down because it is, you're building something out of impermanent ingredients. Like you're building something that's necessarily impermanent, you know. So there will be that.
I like he brought Atlantis in there, right? Atlantis got wiped out because their technology. I'm like, whoa, cool. I don't know.
But also what grows also decays. So it is struck down, you know, like it's not, it's just what grows doesn't like rail against its own getting struck down, you know. And like the idea of like the ego does rail against being struck by the lightning of complete realization or whatever, you know. And that's, and the ego like will shrink back and reiterate itself, you know, with that potentially, or it'll embrace it, you know, whatever. But so yeah, I mean, what grows will naturally like just cycle. Like I like that, like using the cross, like with the rosy cross as the metaphor for growth too, like growing up and out. It's the cross. I don't know. And like I like, you know, I like that image of Jesus too, like the death and resurrection. I dig that shit. Like compassion.
Yeah, for the cross and the whole like, cycle of rebirth and carnation.
Yeah. And like, but like, and it is different than just like embracing just like a pure egotistical, self-limiting construct that is ultimately fragile because it's totally based on impermanent values. but at the same time, that's a sort of growth as well. It's just different, you know. It's like kind of different. It's, you know, it all will be recycled back. Permanent. I believe. Okay.
Agreed. Should I find a quote?
Quote it up.
Quote it up. I already said that. If anyone has a quote, go for it.
I liked I mean, I already said the quote at the very end of the chapter, which
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, okay. So page 440, the primordial and eternal mission of mankind is thus to cultivate and maintain the garden, i.e. the world in the state of equilibrium and cooperation between spirit and nature. I mean, I kind of, I agree with that in my definition. Yay. All right, that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good chapter.
Good
Mhm.
talk.
Great chapter. I think it was good for like defining what, like, how you feel about like yourself and like the way you have like organized your thoughts in respect to like, you know, a bunch of topics like sin, like internal sin versus like external, like, you know, temptations, and like how you like see the fall and like what you value in growth, and, you know, kind of cautioning yourself against certain ways of being that could be kind of seemingly biological. It's almost like a scapegoat in a way, instead of like, you're like, oh, you know, boys will be boys or something. You're like, no, boys could be better if they just like didn't think boys will be boys, you know, like, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't let you sink into like circular thinking. It's more like fractal, like you said. So I really like just like engaging with that I guess content cognitively, just like by myself, just kind of like sussing out how I feel and like where I'm at with those things was fun too, because it's nice.
Yeah. This chapter definitely reaffirmed, I mean, like most of the chapters, but it reaffirmed the path that I'm on and made me more confident in kind of, but not in a way where I feel like I'm building a tower. Like, I agree with him. And I think it's a beautiful, you're right, like dissection of, that, and just kind of reaffirms what I think about myself a little bit more. Or not think about myself, but like understand. You know what I'm trying to say.
And you're not specializing. I think that's the key too.
Okay, thank you.
Agrees you
Damn
with the
it.
chapter.
Damn it, I'm not specializing, author.
Not specialized.
Well, it's fun. It's like, I think that it's almost like specializing is almost like kind of like a metaphor for like Babel in like a different way too, or like, you know how in this world you get rewarded for being specialized, but it's their way of like segregating knowledge in like a way where like you could never have all the puzzle pieces if you're specialized. You could never in a million years, even if you specialized in every single thing for every single life you've ever had, you'd still never like come anywhere close, you know, to having all the pieces to the puzzle. And so I think it's kind of like a control in a way where you can look for like whatever evils could prey on you or things that you could be susceptible to based off of the way you segregate yourself in your thoughts and in the information and the knowledge you're willing to accept, you know, at the very least. You don't have to agree with something to read it, you know.
Yeah.
But it still gives you a little bit more of a understanding that other people think this way and that this is something out there that is operating the same world as me, you know.
Yeah.
1000%. I'm going to stop the recording. Goodbye, people listening.